The morning nurse handed me my discharge papers with a smile and told me I was one of the good ones. 3 days after hip replacement surgery, and I was already walking the hallway without the parallel bars. I thanked her, tucked the folder under my arm, and reached for my phone to call my son. I told myself I wasn't nervous. 63 years old, a man who had buried a wife, raised a child alone, and built a small plumbing business from a single truck into a 6-crew operation before I retired. Nervous wasn't something I did easily. But the call went to voicemail twice before my son finally picked up, and something in his voice, that slight delay before he spoke, told me everything I didn't yet know. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to hear the ending first. Because when I was sitting in that hospital corridor, waiting for a ride that didn't come, I could not have imagined that 6 weeks later, I would be standing on a cedar porch above the Hiwassee River, watching the morning fog lift off the water while the coffee went cold in my hand, and I wouldn't care one bit. I couldn't have imagined that my son would drive 4 hours to stand in my driveway and stare at a property he didn't know existed, with an expression on his face that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I couldn't have imagined any of it, but that's exactly what happened. My son's name is Derek. He was 36 that January, married to a woman named Tiffany, father to 2 kids. I would walk through fire for a 9-year-old boy named Cooper and a 7-year-old girl named Rosie. For 2 years I had lived in the spare bedroom of their house in Knoxville, the house I had co-signed the mortgage on when Derek's credit was still rebuilding from a bad business decision. I paid 1/3 of the utilities every month, and never once kept count. Dad. His voice on the phone was careful, the way you're careful when you've already decided something and just need the other person to catch up. About picking you up. I'm ready when you are, I said. They said noon. A pause. Tiffany's parents are here. I waited. They drove in from Asheville last night. Her dad had some kind of situation with their landlord, and we said they could stay with us for a little while until they find something. That's fine, I said, because I meant it. People needed help. I understood that. There's still my room. Another pause, longer this time. That's the thing, Dad. I walked to the window at the end of the corridor. Parking lot below, gray January sky above. A woman was helping an elderly man into a minivan, her hand firm on his elbow, and I watched them until the van pulled away. We gave them your room, Derek said. It made more sense. Their stuff was already in the car. We figured you could use the garage space we set up. We put a space heater out there and everything. It's not bad. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was 63 years old with a brand new hip and 3 days of hospital food in me, and my son was telling me to sleep in a garage. Come get me, I said. We'll talk when I get there. He arrived 40 minutes late. He didn't come inside. He texted from the parking lot. The drive home was 22 minutes and we spoke maybe 4 sentences. He asked if the surgery went well. I said yes. He said the traffic was bad on 40. I said nothing. When we turned onto their street, I saw the Asheville plates on the SUV in the driveway, and I understood that this was not a temporary confusion. This had been decided. Tiffany met us at the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was wearing a new blouse I hadn't seen before, her hair done, the kind of presentation you make when you want someone to know you're not embarrassed even though you should be. Her parents stood behind her in the living room, a man named Gerald, thick through the shoulders with the handshake of someone who liked to establish things early, and a woman named Pat, who looked me over in a way that made me feel like furniture being appraised. Cooper and Rosie came running from the back of the house, and that was the only moment in the next hour that felt real. Cooper wrapped both arms around my waist and told me he'd saved me a piece of his birthday cake from the freezer. Rosie pressed her small palm flat against my hip and asked in a whisper if it hurt. I told her only a little. She nodded seriously and said she had drawn a picture of me to help me feel better, and when she produced it from behind her back, a crayon figure of a man with an enormous smile and a walking stick. I had to look away for a second. Derek showed me the garage. I want to be precise about this so you understand exactly what I was looking at. It was an attached 2-car garage. One side still had Derek's riding mower and 3 seasons of stored equipment. On the other side, they had pushed a cot against the wall, placed a plastic lawn chair beside it, and put a space heater on the concrete floor. There was an extension cord running to a reading lamp. The overhead fluorescent buzzed and flickered. There was no bathroom. I would need to use the side entrance to come inside. It's just until we figure out the room situation, Derek said. He was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, not quite meeting my eyes. Gerald and Pat are going through a hard time. I had hip replacement surgery 3 days ago, I said. I know, Dad. The cot has a good mattress. I looked at the cot. It was a folding camp cot, the kind you took to a weekend campout, and I was a 63-year-old man with a fresh incision and a physical therapy schedule. I'm going to get my things, I said. He must have thought I meant I was settling in, because he nodded and went back inside. I went to the spare room, my room, and stood in the doorway. Pat had already put her lotions on my dresser. Gerald's reading glasses were on my nightstand. The quilt my late wife Margaret had made from her mother's old house dresses was folded at the foot of the bed, pushed aside to make room for someone else's decorative pillow. I lifted the quilt and held it for a moment. Margaret had spent 8 months making that quilt. She'd called it her Patience Project. She died 4 years ago, a Tuesday in October, and I hadn't spent a single night without some part of her nearby since then. I folded the quilt over my arm and started packing. Cooper appeared in the doorway while I was pulling shirts from the closet. "Where are you going, Grandpa?" "I have somewhere I need to be," I told him, which was not exactly a lie. I had been rolling an idea around in my mind for 30 minutes, something that had seemed impossible until about 30 minutes ago, and now seemed like the only reasonable option in the world. "Is it because of Gerald and Pat?" he asked. I looked at my grandson, 9 years old, sharp as a tack, watching me with his mother's gray eyes and his grandfather's too-straight posture. "Your mom and dad made some decisions," I said carefully. "I'm going to make some decisions of my own. Can I come?" I almost said yes. "Not tonight, buddy, but I'm going to call you tomorrow. Every single day." Rosie cried when I hugged her goodbye. Cooper stood very straight and shook my hand like a little man, which was almost worse. Tiffany said something about how this was all temporary. Derek stood near the door with his jaw tight, wanting me to make this easier for him, and I didn't. I called a car service from the driveway. The driver was a young woman named Keisha, who took one look at my suitcase and my slow walk and asked if I needed help loading up. I said yes, and thanked her. When she asked where I was going, I gave her a hardware store address about 12 miles outside of town. She glanced at the rearview mirror. "Hardware store?" "I need to pick something up," I said, "and then I need a ride to Tennessee." The key was in a lockbox at my storage unit, the unit I had kept for 4 years without telling anyone about it, not because I was being secretive, but because nobody ever asked. After Margaret died, I had cleared out her mother's house in Polk County, a small house on 7 acres above the Hiwassee, the one her family had owned since the 1970s. Her mother had left it to Margaret. Margaret had never updated the deed. When she died, it passed to me. The house itself was small. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a window above the sink that looked straight down the hill to where the river bent around a stand of hemlocks. The porch wrapped around 3 sides. Margaret and I had talked for years about fixing it up, making it our retirement place. Then she got sick, and we stopped talking about the future in any specific way. I had not been back since I cleared out her mother's things. 4 years it had sat empty. A neighbor named Roy checked on it twice a year, and I paid him in cash, and we had an understanding. I had thought about selling it more than once. Something always stopped me. I used to tell myself it was sentimentality. Sitting in the back of Keisha's car with my suitcase and Margaret's quilt, watching Knoxville fall behind me, I understood it was something else. It was instinct. It was Margaret looking out for me from wherever she was, keeping something in reserve for when I needed it most. The drive was 90 minutes. Keisha found an oldies station, and neither of us talked much. When we turned off the county road onto the gravel track that led up through the trees, her headlights caught the frost on the grass and made everything silver. The house appeared around the last curve, dark and still, smaller than I remembered, but solid. The porch boards were good. The roof had been re-shingled by Roy's brother 2 summers ago. I'd paid for that remotely. The chimney stood straight. I paid Keisha and tipped her well, and stood alone in the cold with my bag and my quilt, and listened to her taillights disappear down the hill. The spare key was under the 3rd porch board from the left corner step. Margaret had put it there herself, a detail I had not thought about in years, but which surfaced without effort, the way her things always did when I needed them. The lock opened smoothly. I found the breaker panel by feel. The switches exactly where they had always been, and when the lights came on, the house exhaled around me. the way old houses do when they've been empty too long, and are glad of company. The furniture was sheeted. The kitchen needed a cleaning. The water took 3 minutes to run clear. But the fireplace worked. Roy had left a cord of split oak stacked on the side porch, and by 9 o'clock I had a fire going and Margaret's quilt around my shoulders and a cup of instant coffee in my hand, sitting in her mother's rocking chair watching the flames. I slept better that night than I had in 2 years. The next morning I called Cooper first thing as promised. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. I told him I was fine. I told him the place was nice, and there was a river, and in the spring maybe he and Rosie could come visit. He asked if there were fish. I said, I didn't know yet, but we'd find out together. Mom and Dad are fighting, he said, low enough that I knew he'd gone somewhere private to talk. That happens sometimes, I said. It's not about you. I know. He was quiet a moment. Gerald ate your yogurt. I laughed despite everything. Let him have it, buddy. I spent the first week doing what the physical therapist had told me to do, walking, resting, icing, walking again. The hill down to the river was too steep for the first few days, so I walked the gravel road in both directions, getting my bearings. Roy came by on day 3. A lean man in his 60s with permanently stained hands and the careful speech of someone who'd spent a lot of years choosing words well. He seemed unsurprised to see me. Figured you'd show up eventually, he said, and left it at that, which I appreciated more than I could say. The town of Reliance was 8 miles down the road. The diner there had good biscuits and better coffee and a counter stool where I became a regular. The woman who ran it, a widow named Barbara, remembered my mother-in-law. Edna came in every Friday for 30 years, she said. Sweet woman. You look like someone she would have liked. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said thank you and asked for a refill. My son called on day 9. I let it ring the first time. The second time I picked up. Dad, this has gone far enough. His voice had that controlled quality that meant Tiffany was in the room. You just left. No note, no explanation. The kids are upset. I spoke to the kids every day, I said. I left because your alternative was a garage cot. It was temporary. So is my patience, I said, which surprised both of us. A silence. Then, where even are you? Somewhere comfortable, I said. Somewhere that's mine. He went quiet. I could hear him trying to work out what that meant, running through what he knew of my finances, my contacts, my history, and coming up short. He had never known about the Polk County property because I had never told him, not out of secrecy, but because in our family we had a habit of only discussing problems, never reserves. I thought about changing the subject. Then I thought about the garage cot and the camp chair on the concrete floor, and I decided he could sit with the uncertainty a while longer. I need you to tell me you're safe, he said, and his voice shifted then, just slightly, enough that I could hear the boy underneath the man. The boy who used to climb into my truck at job sites and eat peanut butter sandwiches and tell me about his day. I felt the pull of it, and I stood firm anyway. I'm safe, I said. I'm well. I'll talk to you soon. It was Tiffany's idea to come in person. I knew that without being told. When Derek called 3 weeks later and said they were driving down for the day, just to see me, just to make sure things were okay, I heard her coaching in the phrasing. He didn't have the smoothness for a sentence, like, just to make sure things were okay. That was her language. I told him the address. There was a long pause. Polk County? Follow 411 south from Etowah, I said. Turn left at the church with the red door. Gravel road up the hill, you can't miss it. I was on the porch when they arrived, sitting with my coffee, watching the river. I heard the car before I saw it, Derek's pickup, then a second car I didn't recognize, and I felt a small, cold clarity settle in my chest, because that meant Tiffany had told her parents, and her parents had come along, and whatever Derek imagined this visit was, it had become something else. All 4 of them got out of the vehicles. Gerald looked up at the house with the particular expression of a man immediately calculating value. Pat was already on her phone. Tiffany had her arms crossed against the cold. Derek stood apart from the others, looking at me on the porch, and for a moment neither of us moved. I walked down the porch steps slowly. The hip still needed respect, and met them in the yard. This is some property, Gerald said, before hello or anything resembling it. It is, I said. How long have you owned it? Tiffany asked. Her voice had the careful lightness of someone trying to sound casual about something they're not casual about at all. Since my wife's mother left it to her. And then to me, Derek's jaw moved. You never mentioned it. You never asked. A beat of silence. Gerald had started walking toward the tree line, looking down at the river, and I watched him the way you watch someone walking through a room full of things that belong to you. Dad. Derek stepped forward, lowering his voice. I know things got off to a bad start. What happened with the room that was wrong? I know that. I should have handled it differently. But you can't just disappear and not tell anyone where you are. I told Cooper every day, I said again. I kept that promise. He's 9. He answered the phone every time I called, I said. Which is more than I can say for his father when I was sitting in a hospital corridor waiting for a ride. He had the grace to look down at that. Gerald had wandered back from the tree line. River access is nice. This whole parcel, what, 7 acres? 8? 7.5, I said. You thought about what you're doing with it? His tone was easy, conversational, the way you discuss something you've already decided isn't really someone else's business. I'm living in it, I said. He looked at the house again. It's a lot of space for one person. It is, I agreed. Good thing I like space. Tiffany made her move then, the one I had seen coming since they pulled up the driveway. She came to stand beside her husband and touched his arm in a way that was meant to look supportive, but was actually directional. Dad, she said, and it was the first time she had ever called me that without the slight hesitation she usually put before it, which told me how much she wanted something. We've all been under so much stress. Gerald and Pat being at the house has actually helped us a lot, having that extra support with the kids while things have been tight. But we want you to know there's always a place for you with us. Cooper and Rosie miss you every single day. She was good. I gave her that. The children deployed at the end, the exact spot where they'd land softest. I miss them too, I said. Then come home. I am home, I said. I kept my voice level and kind. The way you speak to someone when you want them to hear you instead of just your tone. This is my home. It was always my home. I just wasn't ready for it until now. Tiffany's careful smile held. We could work something out. The kids would love it here on weekends. There's obviously plenty of room for everyone too. To what? I asked. To stay? She stopped. I want to be clear about something, I said, and I stepped back slightly so I could see all 4 of them at once. This property isn't available. It's not going to be managed by anyone other than me. It's not going to become anyone else's arrangement. It's mine, and I intend to stay here. Gerald made a sound that might have been a laugh. Little old place like this. You could probably get a good price if you... Gerald, I said, and something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. I'm going to say this once, respectfully, because you're my son's guests, and this is a civil conversation. This house is not for sale, and it is not under discussion. The silence that followed had weight to it. Derek was looking at me differently than he had looked at me in years. Maybe since he was a teenager, the last time he'd had to figure out that I was not going to fold. His father was standing on 7 acres above a river, in a house that was paid for, wearing a jacket that didn't belong to a man who could be pressured into a garage. What about us? He asked. Just him now, his voice quiet enough that the others couldn't hear well. What about our family? Your family includes Cooper and Rosie, I said. They are welcome here any time. Weekends, holidays, summers, any time you want to bring them. I will be here, and I will be glad to see them. He waited. You and Tiffany are welcome to visit when you bring them, I said. This is not a permanent exile. I'm your father and I love you. But I'm not coming back to sleep in a corner of someone else's house because it's convenient for your in-laws. I'm done with that. He was quiet a long time. Behind him, Tiffany and her parents had drifted back toward the cars in that way people do when they realize a negotiation has failed and they don't want to be seen as having participated. I was wrong, Derek said finally. About the room, about the garage, about all of it. I know, I said. I didn't think it through. It was pressure from all directions, and I took the path of least resistance, and that path went right through you. It did. He looked at the house again, then at the river. It's beautiful here. It is. Mom would have loved it. That landed the way it was supposed to, square in the center of my chest. She picked it, I said. Her mother bought it, but Margaret always said it was the most peaceful place she'd ever been. I think she was saving it for when we needed peace. He wiped his eyes quickly. The way men who were raised not to cry will do it fast, almost hidden. I'm sorry, Dad. I know, I said. Bring the kids next weekend. We'll see if there are any fish. The first weekend, Cooper caught a small bass and released it, and talked about it for 2 solid hours. Rosie decided the porch was her kingdom and set up her art supplies on a folding table I found in the storage shed. She painted 3 pictures of the river and gave me all of them, which meant I now had 4 of her paintings on my walls, including the one with the crayon figure and the enormous smile. Derek and Tiffany came for that first visit and sat on the porch, and we managed a whole afternoon without anyone saying the wrong thing, which felt like its own kind of progress. Gerald and Pat were not mentioned. Later, when Cooper was in bed, and Rosie had fallen asleep on the couch, with a paintbrush still in her hand, Derek told me that his in-laws had moved out 2 weeks after I found an apartment in Asheville. Apparently the landlord situation had resolved. I nodded and said nothing, because I had learned the hard way that saying "I told you so," even when you've earned it, mostly just makes people defensive. Tiffany sat beside her husband with her hands around her coffee mug, and at some point she said quietly, "We should have done better by you. No performance in it, no angle, just the plain words." "Yeah," I said, "but here we are." I called Roy the next morning to tell him I was staying for good and he could stop charging me for the check-ins. He laughed and said he'd figured as much. His wife sent over a jar of apple butter that lasted me 2 weeks. The woman at the diner started putting my coffee order in when she saw my truck come down the hill. The physical therapy was going well. The hip that had seemed like a crisis in January was barely a consideration by March. I walked down to the river most mornings now, slow enough to watch the herons work the shallows, fast enough to keep the mussels honest. I built a small dock that summer, nothing fancy, just enough boards over the water to sit and fish from, and Cooper helped me with the second half of it, handing me screws with enormous seriousness. I found a letter in the house, that first spring, tucked in the back of the kitchen drawer, where Margaret's mother had kept her rubber bands and spare buttons. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was just a list, the kind of list a woman writes for herself when she's getting old and wants to remember what matters. Take care of the porch. Don't let the bird feeders go empty. The river is best at dawn. Give the house to someone who will love it. I read it twice and put it in the frame beside Rosie's painting of the man with the enormous smile. I was in the right place. I had always been going to end up here. It just took my son pointing me toward a garage to make me remember that some things belong to you no matter how long you've left them sitting, and that the moment you stop being grateful for what people take from you and start being grateful for what they couldn't take, that's the moment things start making sense. Cooper still asks when he's coming for summer. I told him June. He's already asking about the fish. If this story spoke to you, please like this video and subscribe to Honey Revenge. Leave a comment and let me know what time is it where you are right now. And would you have done what I did, or would you have tried to work things out first? I'd really love to hear from you. The next story is right over there on the left, and I think you're going to want to hear it.